Uh, Good evening. One of the hardest things to probably do is to follow one of your old professors on the stage because you realize you are always their students and you are always in awe of them. Penn's class was remarkably important to me, not only because he was the one who taught me how to read Dante and I think poetry in general, and it was actually in his class that I first read Dante and that I ended up coming up with the title for my first novel. But he was the first one who actually made me believe that I had something to say, which is not a terribly easy thing to do for a 20-year-old student who is trying to begin to think of themselves as a writer. And the confidence that he gave me stays with me. And it felt important to me then, and 13 years later, it feels even more important to me now. And I remain always humbled and always indebted to him and his guidance. I am also equally indebted to the Lannan Foundation, who have been enormously supportive and encouraging, and came and gave me a place and the time to write this novel, probably at a period when I was not sure I would ever find my way back into fiction again after realizing how lonely of a life it is. And they encouraged me to believe in its value and in its significance. And they've done that for myself and for legions of other writers. And our national fiction, our global fiction is vastly greater, and I think will be more enduring because of that. I think it's a big risk, I think, for a writer to try to say what their books are about. For many years, I would say, if somebody asked me, what is my novel about? I would say it's about nothing. And my editor quickly learned to step in and say, please don't ever say that again. And yet I'm still slightly compelled to say that because it's hard to define exactly what the terms of a novel or what the terms of your fiction are. More and more these days, I feel like if I am going to argue for anything, if I was, or if I am compelled to say what I think is central to my books, and especially this novel, How to Read the Air, which I'm going to read from, is that it's an argument for imagination. And imagination, and I say that in probably the most expansive sense of the word, it's an argument for the necessity of narrative and fiction in our lives. And it's my belief, and increasingly more so these days, that it's that ability to imagine and create narrative that allows us to step into the lives of others. And there's a great quote by novelist Marilynne Robinson where she says, "Facts tell us nothing, and if anything, it's facts that need explaining." And like I think many immigrants, I grew up my whole life with a number of facts about my country, Ethiopia, and the things that had been lost in the process of migration. But what I never had and what I was always kind of lacking were narratives and were stories of both the people and the country and the culture that had been lost, and then also this new identity that was being shaped and formed by coming to America. And it was only by the process of creating fiction and writing that I began to realize that there was something that needed to be explained, and narrative was the only process of doing that. And I think behind that idea of imagination, there's something else, and that's a belief in writing as faith, almost. There's a faith that happens, I think, between the writer and the reader, and that faith it's a very fragile and easily damaged one, but it's a necessary one, and it's the faith that says that if I can create these characters and if I can tell these stories, then you will also be able to see them. You will be able to see these characters, and by default, you will be able to see me clearly.
Isn't he wonderful?
There you go.
I want to talk a little bit more about this concept of imagination that you opened up with, because it seems, this is probably not the right word, but I'm a Dante teacher. It seems as if your conception of the imagination is almost theological. That is, the imagination and fiction making are a kind of basic part of what it means to be human, and how people establish their, I love the way you said this, I can't repeat the words exactly, but a kind of a way of capturing the grace and humanity of all of us. Do you see that as what Jonas himself is trying to do in this story? Because he is making stories.
Yeah.
I mean, your second reading was his construction to his class of the history of his father that he really didn't know, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's obviously what Jonas is definitely doing in the novel, and obviously what novelists do is we create and invent lies, and hopefully they're beautiful lies, in the hope that by doing so, one, that we have a chance to obviously express some part of ourselves, but also the idea that the reader will become seduced by those narratives, and they will feel those narratives to be central and relevant to their lives. And that idea of imagination, to me, there is a kind of theistic conception behind it, but also I think a very almost pragmatic political conception behind it, is that in the absence of imagination, we lack the ability to empathize. And there's something very basically human about that. Our act of empathy begins with the ability to recognize kind of basic fundamental humanity in the other. And once you begin to do that, once you begin to, I think, engage in narrative and fiction in that process, then you end up minimizing the distance between you and somebody else. You end up